It's the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast with your hosts, the Wolf and Action Jackson, who are keeping rock alive by talking classic rock, hard rock, progressive rock, heavy metal, 80s music, early MTV, UK vs. US chart success, and much more. This is the home of classic album and live concert reviews and your place for interviews with artists and legends. You're rocking with the Wolf. Hey, rock and rollers. Welcome to episode number 196 of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. Brought to you by me, your host, Mac B. the Wolf, and I will be joined, as always, by my partner in crime from the East Coast of the United States of America, Mr. Gary Action Jackson. And we want to thank everybody who tuned in last week to our show on Green Day's American Idiot, turning 20 here. It's probably the most recent album that we're going to review here on the show because A, we grew up with stuff that's a lot older, and B, 20 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of great rock and roll coming out. There just wasn't. It was kind of the end of rock and roll music as far as I was concerned. I'm glad we've had a resurgence since, but that one was huge. Diamond selling in the U.S., charted all over the world, one of the last big rock albums before streaming took over, and now if someone actually sold 1 million copies, it would be front page news. But this week, going back to the UK for a band that we know you all know, and that's the Beatles, and we're going to talk about their classic album, Abbey Road, as it turns 55. Now, longtime listeners of the show know that I used to live right off Abbey Road, got to visit Abbey Road one fateful day. Got to sit in the studio where the Beatles made all of their music. Got to sit next to the soundboard, walk the halls. It was pretty cool. Call it Abbey Road because of this album and the famous cover with the four boys walking across the zebra crossing, which I have seen many people risk life and limb trying to recreate that photo. Always thought eventually I'd see somebody get clipped. It never happened because I went there several times a week, not quite every day, but I was there all the time checking out, just trying to see who might be going in today, what might be going on. And this was a band that was falling apart. Everybody was ready to move on. They've been in each other's pockets since they were teenagers, since they were kids. Now they have plenty of money. They might have wives and kids and families. They're ready to move on, but because it's such a big machine, they feel stuck. And Paul's doing his best to be as creative as possible. John is getting into heroin and Yoko. George is like, hey, you don't like my songs? That's fine. I'll save them for something of my own. And Ringo, gotta love him, I think he just wanted out. So you can hear it in some of the songs, and some of them are classics, some of them are weird, and we're going to jump into all that here on the episode. But first, we do have a little business to take care of. As always, we like to mention we are proud members of the Pantheon Podcast Network, a family of more than 120 shows. You can learn more at pantheonpodcast.com or follow on socials at PantheonPods. And we've got to give a big shout out to our sponsor, rarevinyl.com, who is based in the UK, folks, and they pick up collections from all over the world. And yes, they have a lot of amazing Beatles items. In fact, someone just bought a first print Sgt. Pepper's with all the inserts the other day, and that was like more than 400 quid. But because we have a code UGLY, UGLY, which you can use at checkout, they save more than 40 quid on the purchase. And they have amazing stuff in there, whether it's singles or rarities, picture discs, imports, first edition, mint stuff, programs, ticket stubs. If you're a Beatles fan, I guarantee you can find something at rarevinyl.com. If you go there and use the code UGLY, you can save 10% off your entire order, not just one item. So you find 5 or 6 things that you love, buy them all, and save a big fat 10% at rarevinyl.com with the code UGLY. Your record collection is going to thank you for that. Now back to Abbey Road. If you've been a long-time listener, you know we're not huge Beatles fans. We respect them. We have some Beatles albums in our collection. And of course, there's some songs when they come on the radio, you're compelled to sing along. But given that I lived in such close proximity to Abbey Road, as this one was turning 55, we figured this would be a good time to revisit it. So we're going to do it here. We're talking about the Beatles' Abbey Road as it turns 55 here on The Wolf. As we've said before on here, we are not huge Beatles fans. Kind of had respect for the Beatles. I went through a bit of a Beatles phase in high school just because I was hanging out with a guy who was really into music. And while he was kind of super into that alternative, like 120 minutes kind of stuff, we were also like, CDs make it worth getting the most classic albums ever. Like you
Right.
go get some Beatles albums and understand where all this pop music came from, and it'll be something that you can have forever. And yes, some Beatles CDs that I bought in like 1987, I still have, and they still work just fine. And you could do stuff like the Past Masters series where you can put, I don't know, 25, 28, I don't know how many it was, like singles all on one CD. But I never got into Abbey Road. I mean, Sgt. Pepper's was big, right? I mean, it came out like its 20th anniversary was when we were in high school. It was like, hey, it was 20 years ago today. Hey, it's been 20 years. Ah. And then the White Album I liked because it was a double album and it kind of went deep and they could do a lot of strange things on it. I liked Help because of the movie that I saw on Cinemax. I even liked the Magical Mystery Tour. I know, don't yell at me, Beatle hardcore fans. I know. But I figure when you said, hey, Abbey Road's celebrating its 55th, I lived 40 yards off of Abbey Road for 3.5 years.
Right.
I passed by the studio almost every day. I did get to go on a tour and lecture in there one day. So I figure, all right, after 55, we're not going to wait for 60. Let's go ahead and knock this out. But this is really the last time they worked together, right? I mean, Let It Be came out afterwards, but those sessions had kind of already taken place. We saw that in like the Get Back movie or the Let It Be movie. They kind of took place first, then they came back and did this. So this is their last time, and this is the band really just kind of starting to really fall apart.
Yeah, it kind of seems to me like they did the White Album, and that was just brutal. Like that, they just beat each other into the ground. They were ready to just kill each other. That was it. They came back for what would be Get Back, Let It Be. That didn't really work out at the time. And so then they did this, and it kind of sounds like when they were doing this, they knew this was going to be it. I think they had kind of a reconciliation, but everybody was kind of going their separate ways. And that was really what kind of broke my heart when I was watching the Get Back sessions, is the stuff that they were doing that you knew was going to be on solo records. Like they were working on it together, but so you knew this was it. They were going to start doing their own thing. And, you always ask me on these records, how did you first hear about them? Or where did you get introduced to this? I don't ever remember a time when I didn't know about this record. This is so massive. Everybody knows this thing. And I'll give you two quick for instances here.
Okay.
We went back to school the other day. And of course, I had to get dragged through. There's 9,000 kids in this freaking high school. But anyway, so we're going through these different classes. And I don't even remember which one it was. It was like literature or something. And over the door is this poster. This woman is probably 25 years old who's teaching this class. Wow. She could have anything, but she has the picture of Abbey Road. It's just everywhere. Everybody knows about this. And then I was thinking about, there was you remember when Vinnie Vincent came back a couple of years ago and he came out of the woodwork, and anyway, Eddie Trunk was interviewing him and he said something about how, Paul said some unkind things about you, and Vinnie said, oh, he's just mean old Mr. Mustard. And I'm like, it's everywhere. Like this album, like it just goes, it transcends everywhere. There's no name of the band on it. There's no name of the album. It's just them on the street, and everybody knows it. Even if you've never listened to this record one time, you don't even know who the Beatles are, you would say, oh yeah, I've seen that picture before. I know that image.
Well, that's the thing. It may be the most iconic cover of an album ever. And living there, I saw people every day risk life and limb to try to recreate this and get that picture, And there was, it was rumored like, hey, what should the cover be? Like, well, we could go to Antarctica, get there. Or we could all go to the Taj Mahal and be sitting cross-legged in front of the Taj Mahal. George is like, why don't we just walk across the road, Because George was really kind of getting sick of this at this point. And, they've been together since they were teenagers, since they were kind of little kids, at least for George. He's like 16. When the Beatles broke up, you thought, oh, okay, well, now they're so old and road weary. He's like 25 years old. I mean, seriously, and now he's starting to get to the point where he could write the songs too. Like it was always Lennon McCartney before, right?
Right.
Now he's coming up with the goods. And some of the songs they were recording on the Get Back and Let It Be, they would end up on All Things Must Pass, including All Things Must Pass, the track. But his two contributions to this album, Something and Here Comes the Sun, are generally regarded as his best in the Beatles.
Yeah, and you could even say they could be the best on this record. I know there's a lot going on here, but as far as like singles, this was really strong. And to think that he was doing it by himself, which I kind of think
that's right.
is interesting too, because I know he kind of always longed to write with them, it could be the three of us or we could do this together, but he really did some pretty good stuff by himself. And I wonder if the other two would have messed it up if they got into it too heavy with him.
Maybe. You never know. But the thing is, those other two, being John Lennon and Paul McCartney,
Correct.
They weren't really working together anymore either. They
Right.
made the business deal that all the songs they wrote together would be Lennon-McCartney. But now we know, and we kind of always knew, because if John's singing, that's his song. If Paul's singing, that's his song. And if it's happy, that's Paul's song. If it's dark and horrible, that's John's song. You can kind of tell, but even in the notes, this is written by Paul McCartney, credited to Lennon-McCartney,
Yeah.
So that's just kind of the way it was. But even Ringo got in on the last one, and it's a classic too. It came out of the gate strong in 1969. I mean, it sold 4 million copies in its first 2 months of release. In the UK, it debuted at number 1, remained there for 11 weeks before being displaced by Rolling Stones' Let It Bleed. Then the following week, which was Christmas, it went back to the top for another 6 weeks before being replaced by Led Zeppelin 2. It was a heady time in 69 and 70 there. But the bottom line is the band was falling apart. John was doing heroin and hanging out with Yoko and having her hang around the band during meetings and photo shoots. And everyone's like, hey, we know you're in love and you want to be together, but this is work.
Right.
That's starting to cause tension. He's being a jerk a lot. After Brian Epstein died, Paul's kind of the de facto boss. Lennon is like, hey, we should get this Alan Klein guy to rep us. Paul's like, I don't know about that. And Paul was right. And, George is growing up and Ringo's like, I don't even want to be here. I mean, this is the greatest thing ever. And I don't even want to do this. And we'll get to, how George wrote Here Comes the Sun, basically playing hooky from an Apple Corps meeting one day. He's like, I don't want to sit around a bunch of accountants anyway. So it's sad that this is going on, but at least Paul and George Martin kind of realized, hey, you know what, this is our last chance. And John Lennon, made the Plastic Ono band because the guys are like, we don't want to do a Cold Turkey song. He's like, fine, make my own band and I'll release Cold Turkey on my own. How you like that? It's like, okay, well, this is the way it's going. But, John's like, Paul's got these old granny songs, like these happy sing-along dance, upbeat dance hall kind of songs that kind of sound old-timey. He's like, yeah, that's for old people. Yeah, it's crap, I don't even want to do that anymore. Or, he totally ragged out the big medley on the back. It's like, he just threw a bunch of songs together and then that was it, not too clever kind of thing. So they've been in each other's pockets and suddenly it's like, hey, you're rich and you're creative on your own and you don't need to be part of this Beatles box anymore.
And you have other people talking in your other ear too. You don't need them. You're the star. Everybody else, they just follow along with you. And after you don't believe it, oh, no, we're all in this together. But then one day you wake up and you say, you know what, you are right. I'm the star. I don't need these guys anymore. So, and I think that the weight of the whole thing too was crushing them. It was just, you had to do this 24 hours a day. Everything that you did was scrutinized, every move that you made. I mean, there was even, they had that, the concert at the end of the Get Back thing. And they were talking to people in the streets who were gathered. And then, I don't like what they're doing now. I wish they do the old stuff. You're never going to make everybody happy. You just have to plow through it.
Yep. And, when you're 29, 28 and wealthy, why do you want to hang out with the guys you're hanging out with when you're 16 or 17? No one does that. So,
well, I mean, even, you're talking about that, even Ringo Starr, now he's, hanging out with Peter Sellers and he's going to be in this movie and he's doing his own thing. So yeah, everybody's different. Everybody's kind of ready to move on at this point.
Well, that's right.
Hi, this is Jim McCarthy of the Yardbirds, and you're listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London.
So we start the classic Abbey Road with Come Together. And of course, we knew this one growing up.
Yeah.
I feel like in the 80s, there was kind of a big 60s revival in the late 80s when we were in high school. But there was also kind of a John Lennon revival. I know Paul kind of went out and did Tripping the Live Fantastic tour, and it was a big tour, and it was a live album that did pretty well. Around the time that the Pink Floyds and the Rolling Stones were doing their big tours of the late 80s. But then the Imagine movie comes out, and then in 1990, it's 10 years since his assassination. And I think everyone kind of jumped on the Lennon bandwagon again. And I probably was guilty of it too. Thinking, oh man, he was so great and it's so horrible that he was killed. And it is. But I didn't understand all the nuance of what he was after on some of this. And so, I don't know, it took me a while to grow up. Now I'm like, I love the Bed In for Peace, the first of which is in the same hotel we stayed at when we saw Iron Maiden last summer. But some of the stuff, when he's monkeying with the lyrics or, you know, some of it's like, all right, just settle down. All right. I mean, can't you be a little happy like Paul? You know, it's just... It's also ambiguous and so smart, so clever, right?
And it has to be tough too, because you come into the studio and you're like, okay, we're ready to go here. We're back together. We're gonna do this. What do you got, John? Well, I'm sad and mad at everything. And your stuff is, I don't even like the stuff that you brought. Oh my God, this is gonna be it. And then there's the whole thing with I guess I didn't even know or I didn't remember that he was in a car accident. He and Yoko were in a car accident. Well, you should probably get her to bed and make sure that she feels okay. Well, I've got an idea. Why don't we bring the bed in here so that she can be with, oh, my sweet, dear baby Jesus. Can we not do this now all the time? So, yeah, it had to be rough for the other dudes. But you were talking, too, about the John Lennon revival. Could we thank our friend Michael Jackson for that, too? Because I do remember the whole thing where they sold the deal, or he bought the rights, and then Revolution was in the Nike commercial, and it was horrible because how dare you? But then as a kid, I remember hearing that for the first time and thinking, well, this song kind of kicks ass.
That's a pretty good song.
Yeah. I've never listened to the White Album before, and had it not been for that commercial, it probably would have been a little longer. So who knows? But yeah, there was a big hype around it. And yeah, people were just in love with this again. I think there was kind of a little bit of a lull maybe in the late 70s.
Yeah,
I mean, it's all relative because I think they still were selling records, but there was that big uptick, and especially for people like us who hadn't really experienced it yet.
Didn't live through it. Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah. So Come Together and then Something, which is a George Harrison song. The first two songs of the album were released as a double A side, which is just something the Beatles used to do. It's kind of crazy. I didn't realize that it was a song that Lennon kind of put together for a Timothy Leary anti-Reagan campaign in California. But he did, eventually they came in to make a Beatles song, and Paul is on the Fender Rhodes piano, which I think, it does add a little good something to it there. But he's like, come together over me. You talking about, everybody needs to come together because I'm so great? Or is it like, well, because people are going to come together over me, then I need to come up with something good for us to come together over? I don't know.
I don't know either. And this is one of those deals where this was written by Lennon McCartney, right? Technically. However, you got Ringo in there doing that really cool drum fill at the beginning where he put the tea towels over the drums to kind of mute the sound. I'm like, that's a huge part of that song that makes it so cool that he doesn't get credit for. Like there's no way they sat there and told him to play it like that. He just said, okay, I'm going to fit this in. And to me, that makes the beginning of the song.
Well, and apparently he in 2021 went on one of the talk shows and said that this song, Come Together, was his favorite Beatles song. I said, really?
Okay.
But maybe that's got something to do with it because he's like, you know what? Okay. I mean, it's arrangement. Technically, he doesn't get the writing for it. It's arrangement.
Right.
But he's showing what he contributed to these amazing songs, even though he's got, 2 writing credits over the years. One of them's on here. But Come Together, it's a little heavy, but then Something is this beautiful George Harrison song, one of his very best. And apparently it's the second most covered Beatles song out of their catalog after Yesterday.
Yeah. And And one of the big ones, and now I was thinking about it last night. I forgot about it, and now you just made me remember it again. One of the big ones was Frank Sinatra. Scoo-doo-doo-doo, she's got something. But I mean, and even he said it's a fantastic song. But to think about that, you say, okay, what's the number one song? Well, it's Yesterday. Okay, got it. What's number 2? Whammo. Something, written by Harrison by himself.
That's right. Double platinum U.S. single, went to number 1 in the U.S. only, quote unquote, number 4 in the UK. And look, the album went number 1 all over the world. If we spend time talking about everywhere and went number 1, we'll never get out of here. But certainly it went to number 1 in the US and the UK. It's just a beautiful song. I always loved it. I really did. And I'm just glad that they allowed him to do it and got on board with it, and they realized, hey, he is actually bringing some of the goods here. Now, he had the most to gain from the Beatles breakup, I feel like, in that finally people could hear who he was. You could say John Lennon or Paul McCartney did, because people are going to be like all over their new album once they come out. But he'd been holding back for so long that All Things Must Pass was a triple album when it came out, triple LP. And I think it was in 1970. And it had those amazing songs on it like What Is Life and All Things Must Pass and the big one, My Sweet Lord. So this is Harrison, growing up a little bit. But he's also kind of in a bad mood sometimes, he got a pot bust or something like that. He got arrested, he gets mad. He had a bit of a temper, I guess, so it's just the interesting how they're all growing up and out, trying to show that, oh yeah, we're all part of this confined package, but really they're four guys looking to just go their own way. And, he may be a little surly at times, but this one is beautiful.
Right. And this is kind of a testament to the entire band that you had all four guys contributing songs, and the Ringo one we'll get to in a minute here. They're all pretty good. They all have their own different things they're bringing to this record. It wasn't, you don't have the one weirdo song where it's like, well, you begged for it a million times, so we'll put it on for you. But so it shows you that all of these guys do really contribute to this record.
Well, that's right. That's right. And so those are two big classics in the Beatles catalog. Now, the next one, Maxwell's Silver Hammer. Fun. It's kind of old-timey, something you'd hear in like a dance hall in the 40s or something like that. This is one of those that John hated of Paul's, And it's do-do-do-do-do. Yeah. It's a little cheesy, especially in 69 when you could be talking about war, sex, or whatever it was John wanted to sing about, trying to kick heroin, whatever. But all I can think about is Mal.
Yes.
Their longtime roadie. In the Get Back movie, he's playing the anvil, right?
Right.
And he does it ding, ding, and he smiles, like, I'm doing it. I'm recording with the Beatles, man. He's got this huge grin on his face. Meanwhile, John's like, this is another one of stupid Paul songs. But Mal, he couldn't be happier.
You do get to see somebody who is in the middle of the most exciting thing that's ever going to happen to them. And yeah, he's 100% in the moment. You could have asked him to do that 1,000 more times and he would have all day long. It is kind of a strange deal. It almost kind of sounds like, or it's reminiscent of When I'm 64, like you were saying, that kind of the tune, but it's a guy killing people with a hammer. Like it's a little strange on the lyrics part.
And apparently everyone disliked the session. Like Ringo said it was the worst session ever and the worst track we ever had to record. So that's kind of like Paul going, oh no, this is a great one. They're like, yeah, we're not feeling this. No, it is really great,
So I think
everyone's like,
I think you have that and the fact too that he was like, it had to be perfect. So you didn't want to make this thing at the beginning, and now he's going to ride you till we do it 1,000 times. Yeah, no thanks.
So they're starting to really start to needle each other, and everyone's like, "No, I don't like this one." And suddenly George is the one who's now standing as a composer next to them. He's like, "Well, I thought until this album George's songs weren't that good," which is not a nice thing to say, especially when While My Guitar Gently Weeps was on the White Album.
That wasn't bad.
And George's like, "Well, that's a matter of taste. All down the line, people have liked my songs." And John's like, "Paul, no one else digs this stupid Maxwell's hammer." But did you even dig it, Paul, or you just kind of forced us to do it? And you can see in the movie that George is like, it's not complicated. Look, you want me to play, I'll play. You don't want me to play, I won't. You just tell me what you want me to do, it'll please you, and I'll do it. Just do it so I can get out. He's like being in school. It's like, I'm supposed to read this, fine, I'll read it. I'm supposed to write all this down, fine, I'll write it down. And then can I go home kind of thing. So it's a funny, funky, quirky little song in their catalog, but we can't spend a ton of time on these songs, so we got to keep moving. The next one, Oh Darling, is another McCartney, right? And it's better, but it is, again, it's not something you'd think from the biggest band in the world in this 1969, especially when you think Let It Bleed and Led Zeppelin 2 are going to usurp this album on the charts. Well, those songs are way tougher and harder than Oh Darling. Please believe me. I like the Oz. I don't know if any band after the Beatles quite captured harmonies the way they did. And that is kind of the magic of the Beatles. And it makes their songs so distinct and instantly recognizable. And so for that, Oh Darling, it's still a great one. But at the time, I see what John is saying about Paul's songwriting.
Yeah. And wasn't there a note in here too that he thought he should have sung this because it was more up his alley as far as the vocal
range
delivery?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think he did.
I don't know. I mean, I would have a hard time in a situation like this where you knew every day you were going to go in and he was just going to be a pain in the ass. Like you did the comments before about the George songs. Like, why do you have to be like that? Why can't you be like, hey, yeah, these are great songs. I mean, he wrote some great songs before, but these are really great. Well, I didn't really like his other songs. Well, you know what, dude? Go screw. Nobody wants to hear that doom and gloom all the time. And even if you didn't like this song, I mean, if you're going to show up, just show up and do it. And I think there were a couple that he wasn't on this.
Right. Yeah.
Because
a couple he didn't end up being on because of the car accident.
And he was just like, yeah, no, thanks. I don't want to do this.
Well, anyway, moving on to the Ringo, right?
Correct.
To the Richard Starkey, right? Yes. Octopus's Garden.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could argue that this is a song for children, but then I argue, yes, it's a wonderful song for children to help get them into rock and roll. And I guess he was on Peter Sellers' yacht and ordered something like fish or something, but they brought him squid and he never had it before. It's like a little rubbery, tastes like chicken. But I guess the captain was telling me about how octopuses will grab shiny, cool rocks and carry them with them to bring back to their garden. And it was like, I would rather be an octopus under the sea instead of dealing with all this Beatles nonsense and being in these meetings where everybody's just pissed off and all we can do is sign stuff for lawyers and accountants and go over taxes. And taxes were complicated in the 60s. Everyone who complains about paying taxes now, if you made over $1 million a year in like the late 60s, early 70s in England, it was like 90%, unless you did all this crazy stuff. And then I think for a while it was over 100%, which doesn't make any sense. But anyway, and that's why the Stones became tax exiles and everybody kind of split for a while because you couldn't make it. But it's beautiful. I think it's great for kids. He's written a book, The Octopus's Garden, a kid's book, which I got for my daughter, which, helped her get into music. It helped her get into reading, helped her to learn about who the Beatles were. And so I love Ringo for this. And again, the ahs in the background might be the best all time, man.
Yeah, I wrote down it's silly, but it works. It's a one-of-a-kind song. Let's put it to you that way. I don't think anybody else but Ringo could have done it. But then when you get into that whole thing about how, the octopus, it takes the stuff and it makes its little garden and it lives there. I'm like, well, that's kind of heavy-duty thinking there, Ringo. And I think you're right. I think he wanted to be in the octopus's garden and not in the studio with these guys.
But I mean, you remember where George was kind of helping him with it in Get Back. So, no, just do this. Because I'm like, wow, look at him go. He's writing the song.
That was really cool because he came in and he starts fooling with it. And you see Harrison just turn around like, wait a minute. That's something. You've got the seed of something here. And then, and the cool part was Harrison could have totally taken credit for this as a songwriter.
Yeah.
He was like, no, it was Ringo's idea. I just kind of helped him, get it to the finish line. Yeah. So I always thought that was kind of cool because probably most people would have been like, yeah, it's a great song, Ringo. Now put me down for 50%. Thank you.
Well, and then George helped him with some of his big solo rights of the 70s too, like Don't Come Easy and Photograph and that kind of stuff. He kind of helped, write those. But I think it's George who's blowing bubbles into milk to get that effect on the, on the album. So he should get some credit for that as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe it would go better on Yellow Submarine. I always kind of assumed that's what it was growing up.
I mean, it makes sense, right?
But it's a happy little song.
Yeah.
And then you get to I Want You, in parentheses, She's So Heavy. Almost 8 minutes of John doing I don't know what. I never liked this song, probably because it's about Yoko. It's way long. But then it's not like proggy and then it does all this different stuff. It's got some cool Billy Preston stuff on the organ, but it's very ominous. And at the end, it kind of just drones on and on like, okay, we're going to change to something else. No. It's I'm like, stop doing heroin with a Japanese woman, dude. It's not good for you.
It's very odd that this is a love song because it's dark, it's disjointed. I want you so bad. Like, okay, and it's It's a little creepy when you think it's a love song.
I know. And I think it was Guitar World or one of those guitar magazines that said, this is like one of the 50 heaviest songs that predates Black Sabbath. I'm like, you're right. It's kind of got a heavy riff. It's very ominous. It's not really a heavy metal song, but it's heavy. I mean, it's, and he even put that in the lyrics. I think it was the 34th on the list, something like that. But obviously I don't like this one. I'd rather listen to I Want to Hold Your Hand than this. And that's a nursery rhyme at this point. I want to hold your hand, you know?
And I always thought it was weird too that it just ends, just boom. Like it's not like, it's like, is there something wrong with this? Like, did I get a bad copy or something? Because it just, and then there's a gap.
After almost 8 minutes, it doesn't fade. It doesn't have some kind of swirl. It's just over. I'm like, oh, okay. That's probably just like, you know what? I'm out of here today. That's it. That's enough. That's side one of Abbey Road, folks. So yeah, big classics up front, silly Paul songs in the middle, a fun little Ringo ditty, and then this horrible John Lennon thing at the end. But then you flip it over.
Okay, here we go.
Total dichotomy, total change. Like, all right, we're starting over. It's Here Comes the Song. So you go from this horrible, heavy thing that's allegedly a love song to this happy song. And it has a great story about the origin of the song. In that, George just couldn't take a meeting at Apple. I can't do it. I can't deal with the accountants and signing stuff and fighting over stuff. I'm not doing it. I'm not going. So he goes to Clapton's house, his buddy, and he just starts kind of walking around the garden with his guitar, which is something that he did. Clapton's like, I didn't do that. That's something George brought to the table. Tom Petty says the same thing. He's like, you know how to play the ukulele? Here's your ukulele. I'm going to take mine and we're going to walk around the garden. We're going to play ukulele together. Like, is this happening?
Righty?
I'm just walking around the backyard with George Harrison playing the ukulele. But it was like the winter was tough. It's always tough in England. Mm-hmm. And I guess on this particular day and in this particular month, it was very sunny. And it's just, the sun's out, the winter's over. I'm not stuck in those stupid meetings. And if you don't like this song, I don't know what's wrong with you.
It's got that great acoustic intro. And it's just happy. It builds. There's no way you can be in a bad mood when you hear this song.
So between this and something, yes, George was delivering the goods at this point. I think more so than John, certainly. You can argue about Paul. He's obviously incredibly creative and he's putting all these different kind of cool textures in there. But does anyone really love those? Yeah, some of them, yes, some of them, I don't know. Next is Because. Now this one may be the one I know least well. The thing is, when you're growing up, you hear these songs. You heard them on the radio. Maybe you heard some of them in movies, but you always heard these songs. Even if like you didn't have an older brother or cousin or parent who played this album, you've heard all these. This one was probably the one I heard the least out of them all. It is kind of a psychedelic Beatles song, I would say, at front. But they all three, George, John, and Paul, had triple tracked their vocals, which is interesting, to really beef it up to make it thick.
So they took it and they recorded 3. And then 3 became
for
6,
each of them.
And then 3 became 9. So that you've got that. Yeah. So then, and I think that was a big pushback too, was that there's no way you could ever reproduce this live. And now, it's just studio tricks now, but it sounds amazing.
It does. And George Martin's playing the harpsichord, like the electric harpsichord on there, really adding something to it. It's kind of short. It's not a long song at all. It's 2 minutes and 45 seconds, longer than some of the bits of the big medley, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, and you get a little bit of Moonlight Sonata in there at the beginning, kind of like a reminiscent of. We're not going to rip off Beethoven, but we're going to pay homage to him.
We're going to borrow, a couple things here. John Lennon basically wrote this one on his own. It's a good one to have on there. I mean, it just kind of shows what they could do when they were working together. But then we kind of get into the
medley,
into the big one, which is a bunch of songs. Although You Never Give Me Your Money really kind of stands on its own. It's 4 minutes long. Paul's singing it. He wrote it. Is it about Alan Klein? Is it about having to deal with each other? It's about things not going that well in Beatleland, I feel like.
Yeah, I read that too, and they were talking about, well, maybe because the big fights that they got into were after this, so who knows? But it's interesting because it's called You Never Give Me Your Money, right? And so you'd think it would be a mean song, but it's almost sad. It's kind of like, it's like a longing, like you want something from someone that you're not getting, especially with that piano intro. and it's this shows you the power of the Beatles too, because the rest of this stuff shouldn't work at all. This should just be a mess of things that they just threw together, but it's really good.
I know.
It's crazy.
To me, it's endemic of it's just showing you how not fun it had become to be in the Beatles.
Yeah.
And everybody thinks, oh, wouldn't it be so great to be in the Beatles? And even Clapton's like, oh, man, it would be cool to be in the Beatles. Like, George wants to leave. I could slide into the Beatles. I can envision that. But it's not all, roses and
I would love
time
to have seen that. I would have loved to have him go in there for a session and he would have even lasted a day. I don't think. There's no way. No freaking way.
Well, he did My Guitar Gently Weeps. Did he did that at home and send it to him, or did he sneak into...
Well, but I mean, that was...
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but that was when George was still there. I'm talking about like if George was gone.
Yeah.
And he went into that role, and so now it's like, oh, it's just my friend and I'm helping out here. If he was the main person, yeah, he would have just said,
Yeah. So, I mean, it is a good song. And then it slides into Sun King.
Yeah.
It's a John song. I think they used Fleetwood Mac's Albatross as the inspiration to kind of get them going on this, which was on the charts at the time.
Could have.
With Peter Green, yeah. I like the Cult Sun King better than this.
Well, that's not.
Lie to
yes,
you.
I would agree with you. It's not a cover or anything. If you think you're getting the same thing, you're going to be wrong. The note that I have on this one is, though, the guitar is just so light, and that's what makes me insane about these dudes is they know exactly what to do in these songs. You know exactly. You're not like, well, I'm going to put this in. Like you just listen and you say, what is exactly what the song needs? Okay, I'm going to put that in right now. Just this light touch that's in there. And I don't know if I really ever listened to this one before because they go into the foreign language deal.
Yeah. They're kind of saying some stuff in Spanish because Paul knows a little Spanish, and then you say a little Italian, and then you say a little nonsense in there, But it says in there, they sing Here Comes the Sun King. They were going to call it Here Comes the Sun King, but once Here Comes the Sun came out, they didn't want any kind of confusion between the two. So they just made it Sun King. And everybody's laughing, everybody's happy in this. It's like, okay, that's kind of weird given kind of what's going on here and all that. But, then we transition. Now, that's a little bit shorter than You Never Give Me Your Money, right? That's like 2.5 minutes long. Then we go into Mean Mr. Mustard.
Correct.
This 1 minute thing from Lennon. The drum fill is when you know you're onto something else, right? Ringo does this drum fill, and you're transitioning from Sun King into something else. Mean Mr. Mustard's a little negative, and then Polythene Pam, who I guess is his sister, it's a bit brighter, right? It's acoustic guitar. It's not a bad bit of lead guitar from George on there either. So it's these two characters they introduce in these like 1 minute songs. And now I start to see what John means when, Paul took some songs, took some of mine, we squished them all together and made this thing.
Right.
I don't know what they're really trying to do here.
And I think McCartney said something about how it was a good way to kind of get rid of these or, use up these fragments that they had. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Both the Mr. Mustard and his sister, Polythene, they're a minute and change each. They're just ideas. Like they're not fully fleshed out songs. But for some reason, they work in here. Like they don't sound like anything else, but it flows.
It does flow. And then when it goes to She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, that's kind of an iconic song. It's a funny line that everybody knows. And yes, it's a true story that at Paul's house, right around the corner from Abbey Road in St. John's Wood, it's kind of equally between Abbey Road Studios and Lord's Cricket Ground. I've walked past it many times. I guess some girls decided they wanted to go say hi to Paul. So I don't know if they took a ladder over the back fence and hopped in and then went in through the bathroom. And I don't know if they took some pictures, something like that. It wasn't like a big time burglary. It was just fans who wanted to see him. He wasn't there. So they swiped a couple things. And I think they ended up getting some of the pictures back. I'm not sure, but it's a 2 minute song, right? I don't know. Did you like this one growing up? Do you remember it?
I do remember it. To me, it's the power of putting sounds together that are powerful, because I mean, the lyrics are when he goes into Sundays on the phone with Monday, it's like, well, that doesn't mean anything. Like, what are you talking about? Those are just words that rhyme together. But it's the cadence of it. It just gets stuck in your head. And I mean, this one was I would have thought this was a single because they played it so much.
They played it, yeah. Or is it, Jackson, that, Sunday here is this family time, downtime, but you're already worrying about Monday, right? It's already on your mind like, oh, geez, I got to go back to work.
It could be.
And him going back to work is different than us going back to work, obviously. But when you got to go deal with people who you don't want to deal with, then it's just the same as everybody else.
Yeah.
It's just they're making some of the greatest music in the world.
It's catchy as hell. It really is. And it's again, we're firing on all cylinders here as far as putting the sounds together and the textures, and to come in from those last two into this one. And it flows together.
And I just want to tell people, do not try to break into Paul McCartney's house today through the bathroom window or otherwise. There's enough security that I don't think you would make it. But
what year was this? The year that happened was what? It was in the 60s sometime. I'm guessing that now the penalties will be much harsher.
The property is also a lot more valuable. I think he bought the place. I'm probably going to get this wrong. It was either 40,000 pounds or 80,000 pounds, which is a lot of money back in the 60s and 66 whenever he bought it or whatever. Now, well, because Paul McCartney's lived there and raised his kids there and written all these amazing songs there, you can't even put a price on it. Maybe it's worth 100 million. I don't know. But it's worth, if he hadn't lived there, it would be worth like 20, 25, maybe $30 million. So then then once Paul's gone, the girls aren't going to want to live there. What do they do with it? They just hang on to it and pay the taxes. Do they sell it to somebody, some rich, crazy Beatles fan somewhere, like a Russian oligarch or somebody like that would probably buy it? You could never turn it into a museum because the other people who have $20 and $30 million mansions on that street.
Yeah. You wouldn't want foot traffic.
Don't want that, they're not going to have people parking and the foot traffic and all that. So I'm glad Paul's still alive. I hope he lives another 20, 25 years, but that'll be interesting to see what happens to that home. I always was hoping that one day when I'm out walking the dog and I'm walking by there that they just drive out of there and I could just wave to him or something like that. I don't know if he visited Abbey Road Studios while I was living there. I think maybe one day he did. But here's the thing about Paul, and it's probably crazy, but if he goes to Abbey Road Studios, he doesn't take a limo. He doesn't go around the street and in the back underneath. He walks from his house.
That would be insane.
Over to Abbey Road.
That's one of those things where if I saw that, it would be that this can't be real. Like, I've imagined that, wouldn't that be great if you ran into, I couldn't even, and how does that even work? He's so famous that it's would people mob him, or they'd be like, well, that's Paul McCartney. I mean, what do you want me to do? What am I going to do? Go up and say, hey man, it's great to meet you. Get out of my face. What are you talking about?
Well, but he doesn't walk with an entourage. So when most famous people are coming, you see 8 people coming, probably plus some photographers, right? But he just walks down his street, takes a left, walks down to Abbey Road, takes a right, and then he goes across the zebra crossing like everybody else.
I mean, maybe if you just saw a guy in a coat, in a hat walking down the street, you wouldn't think to yourself, hey, that's Paul McCartney. But yeah, if he had 20 security guards around him, you probably would.
You'd figure it out, yeah. But God love him for being that way. Yeah. He's a very special, special man.
Hi, this is Guy Fletcher from Dire Straits, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
Then that transitions into Golden Slumbers. Now, this is also a very nice one. That strings in there that George arranged is very nice. But this is one of those ones that John didn't even play on because he was recovering from the car accident. He's not there and okay, let's just plow through. We're just going to go. Yeah. Interesting story that it's based on the poem Cradle Song from the play Patient Grisel. I don't know anything about that.
Oh, right.
A lullaby by Thomas Dekker. Don't know anything about him, but apparently he saw the sheet music for Cradle Song at his father's home in Liverpool that his stepsister Ruth left there, and he couldn't read the music, so he kind of created his own music around it. It's just really great talent there, man. As a kid, it's just something innate that he had to do. He had to do it, and aren't we all better off for it? But again, is Golden Slumbers a minute and a half, To
me, this was always...
I love his voice.
Yeah, he's cranking it out on this one.
I mean, he's really belting it out. Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry. And I will sing a lullaby. And then it goes into Carry That Weight.
Yeah, which I always thought was one. I didn't realize it was 2 songs. I always thought it was one back in the day.
I agree. Yeah. How would we not?
Yeah.
We're little kids, They didn't get on the radio and explain, okay, now, for anyone who's just learning what Abbey Road is.
These are 2 separate tracks.
I mean, it's really part of one thing, but...
But see, on this one, it's You Never Give Me Your Money, kind of, they have a callback to it. And so this kind of ties it into being one big arrangement.
Yeah, you can hear some of the same melody, piano line. Yeah, absolutely.
And the line of, boy, you're going to carry the weight.
That's right.
That's pretty cool.
And kind of a good riff from George in there. And then it's the end, which starts up tempo, and Ringo's drums going around in circles in the speakers. You can kind of hear it kind of going back and forth there a little bit. And then the guitar is way up front on this one. You can really hear some wailing, and that's George and riffing. But then it's ding, 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 ding down to the piano, and you got the famous line, made even more famous by Chris Farley's interview on Saturday Night Live. And I admit, when that came out, I didn't know this album at all, really. So when he asked him the question, is that true? I'm like, well, what song is that? Well, he mentions it in the interview, but basically, you remember Abbey Road? You remember when you said? He goes, is that true? It was so innocent sounding, and yet he's like, yeah, Chris, in my experience, it's the more you give, the more you get. And then Chris is like, awesome, yes. The best interview I've ever done, But it is a sweet notion that the more love you put out in the world, the more you get back. To some degree, it's true. I haven't found it to be 100%.
Well, yeah. There are going to be those odd ones where it's just you swing and you miss. Yeah.
But I think he and George Martin knew that this was it. This was going to be the end of the Beatles. So this was them saying goodbye. And in the end, and if there's anything that the Beatles would want you to know, it's spread love. The love you get in your life is going to be equal to what you put out there. And that was all of them, really, until the day they died or until this day right now. That's still peace and love.
Yeah.
You never see Ringo's do anything.
He starts off every message with peace and love, peace and love. Yes.
And Paul, same way.
Yeah.
Now, we have to, I guess, talk about Her Majesty, this little 22-second whatever snippet. It's a bit of a song. They call it kind of a hidden track, or like the ghost track at the end. If you didn't stop your record player, it would go ahead and play it. It's another one. It's like, okay, we're starting something. Okay, yeah, boom, done, over, no more. Stop. To me, it's doing a disservice to the end, because the end is the end.
Kind of, yes. You had this grand send off, and now you're saying, "Oh, just kidding. We've got this little other thing for you too." It's also kind of a weird thing to think about. In 1969, you're talking about Her Majesty's a really nice girl. I've always wanted to make her mine. I'm like, is that cool? Like, that's kind of you're not talking about somebody who's like a film star or something like that. You're talking about like the leader of the country. Okay.
Yeah, but she became Queen young.
Right.
And, had a pretty nice rack on her, and all that. And so, people are like, hey, maybe. I mean, But see, the thing is, even then, she was still pretty old. So by this time, she's mid-40s, I guess.
Born in 1926.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So by 69, she's 43. That's not ancient. But if you're Paul McCartney in your 20s with models and actresses all over you, it's a little old. But this thing has sold over 30 million copies worldwide. I mean, over 12 million in the US. It's diamond around the world, multi-platinum around the world. People really did love this album. And it wasn't the last. Let It Be was the last that came out.
Right.
They were going to scrap all that stuff. And I said, no, it's better than we think. Let's go ahead and put it out there, and then we can let everybody know that we're done. But it was the end of an era, and then John's doing Plastic Ono Band. Paul comes out and is like, yeah, I'm going solo. Makes his solo album. George eventually gets his All Things Must Pass out. Everyone's going their separate ways. It happened quickly. And I know they used to make records a lot more quickly back then, but with the news not working the way it is now, where there's, updates every second, it must have been tough for fans to take, like, oh my God, the Beatles really are broken up. And then 2 months later, John's doing something. 2 months later, Paul's doing something. It happened fast. And those who were longing for it were probably like, I can't believe it's over.
Yeah, because you probably had that in-between time where it's like, oh, well, they'll get back together. They'll do something else. And then the solo records start coming out, and then you say, well, this probably isn't going to happen, but maybe. And then, Lennon dies in 1980,